Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey, welcome back to Snakes and Otters. I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
Hey, so this is episode 48. We're calling it Who Loves Ya, Baby? We're going to talk about one of our pop culture fun things that was very formative for us when we were kids, and that's TV cop shows.
Kojak, yes. Telly Savalas, Who Loves You, Baby?
Yep. So that's
With that lollipop.
With that lollipop, yeah.
That's the line from Kojak, one of these early ones. Now, I was kind of giving Robert the blues here because he was mixing in detective shows.
Right. Because for the serious ones, they're very similar.
They're very
in
similar.
They're
structure
very
and
close.
form and intent.
You have to be very careful, otherwise you'll blend the two. And, Martin, you don't want to do that. Am I right here?
Right. I kind of wanted to stick to strictly the police procedural type show.
That's well put. Okay.
You know, rather than the detective show, even though really the cop show's kind of born out of those. Because the detective shows are kind of born out of the novels. Like the Agatha Christie type thing, or
Well, a lot of the 70s
Sam
ones
Spade.
that we think of, the Mannix, the
Rockford Files.
Rockford Files
Huge,
especially, yeah.
huge show, yeah.
Those are about, in a way, they're the modern Western because they're about the lone gunfighter defending the helpless.
There's an irony for you because James Garner played both Jim Rockford
And Maverick.
And Maverick,
Yes.
that's right.
Yes.
Which was exactly that.
Yes.
Yeah.
We could go on and on about parallels because, a lot, as I've said before, all stories are the same. It's the setting and the characters you put in them that are different.
Yeah. So, of course, the police procedural continues even to this day, but
It's very
It's
different.
gotten much more scientific today.
It's very different than the 70s.
When you move on to CSI or Chicago PD or whatever, but
or even the on the Discovery Channel, the History Learning Channel, any one of those.
even the
Forensic.
Forensic files. My daughter, because she studied forensics, that's what she would like to do. But my daughter and my wife, they constantly watch those.
Those-
I always worry my wife is taking notes on those, and it's like, why do you have to write that down about how that wife got caught killing her husband?
But there's just something about these shows in that moment.
They were the first.
Yeah.
In many respects, they set the tone and were the pioneers in many respects for what we know as today, which, to be honest, there's police procedurals all over the place today.
Yeah.
That was not the case prior to 1970.
Right.
Yes.
That's,
At all.
That's something that you brought up when we prepped, and it's a very keen insight.
Yeah, Perry Mason is as close as you got, and that's not a police procedure.
No,
That's a
that's
courtroom
courtroom,
drama.
Yeah. So
That's a Law and Order.
That's exactly-
Westerns dominate television
Yeah,
through the 50s and 60s.
correct.
Yes.
But they're coming to an end.
Well, they were slowly waning, and the powers that be at the networks, and then you have to remember, there's only 3 networks this time, and they dominate everything that's done. They decide they're going to kill that genre, believe it or not. Only Gunsmoke and Bonanza survive into the 70s, and it's only because they were enormously popular. They couldn't quite kill those, although they didn't last that long. But they decided, and if you want to look it up, we've talked about this before, the Rural Purge. Look it up on Wikipedia, and it tells you the story is that the networks decided deliberately these programs that are very non-realistic, and it's both the comedies and the westerns themselves. A lot of the westerns had already fallen away, but the comedies like the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, Gomer Pyle, Andy Griffith, which at this time was Mayberry RFD.
Mayberry RFD, yeah.
Which, because Andy himself had decided to move on. But ultimately, Filmways Company was the one that was making most of these, and the network executives decided at this point, that's not the world we're living in.
They went from what most of Middle America up through the 60s probably would have recognized either as their life or where their parents came from.
That's exactly right.
And it shifted to the cities.
Yeah.
Everything was based in a large
That is- and that's why they
metropolitan
call it
city.
Very idealized American life.
Right.
all the way up through about 1970.
Yeah.
But then everything flops
It
over.
literally changed. Even though these shows were doing gangbusters, those that were still on the air at the time, they had extremely high ratings. This was a risk.
Well, but the question for them probably was, are they extremely high ratings because there's only 3 things on at any one time
That's
to watch?
right. They had a vision. They
You know?
recognized that.
Well, but also partially for the changes. Now, granted, it can be very dangerous for that first one to make the change.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if there's only 3 things you can watch at any one time,
right.
how hard is it to put on a successful show?
Advertisers were the ones that they had in mind for this because they realized that mom and pop aren't really spending the money that their kids will spend.
That was a big realization.
That's right, because you don't
in
have competition.
media.
Is not the driving force here. It is the market that is driving the force, and they recognize these kids will spend money. We better be relevant to them, and that was it. Was you're exactly right?
The
It was
young
a
adults
chance.
of 1970.
We want them to not. We want them to stay home and watch TV. We do not want them
This
to
is
go
the
out.
second half of the baby boomers, basically.
That is exactly
Yeah.
right.
And the first very beginning of our generation.
That's exactly right. Because we were small at those times. But we remember the change because a lot of those old shows were sold into syndication. We would see them years later.
I remember seeing probably a lot of the especially the detective shows first run and the cop shows first run. The Bonanza, Gunsmoke, the Rifle, all of that was syndication for me.
Absolutely.
Anything that debuted in the 60s.
That's right.
I don't have any live memories.
Even
of
the
that.
Wild Wild West, which was essentially an attempt to marry James Bond with the Western genre.
It was James Bond, Western, a little bit of sci-fi. All
That's
together.
exactly all put together, and it was actually very successful. But it was also a victim of this. They realized we don't want that anymore. That's why in 1970 and 71 you get shows like Mary Tyler Moore, which was extremely socially conscious. All in the Family. Maude probably was the most progressive of all the ones that came out. Norman Lear wrote most of these, but there were many others.
Yeah.
And like I say, Bonanza and Gunsmoke, they would only continue for just a couple more years.
Well, and I think the distinction, while I say that all the stories are the same, that only the settings and the characters change, to a large degree that is true. However, as we talked about in the show prep, this 1970s, late 1960s, early 70s, there's that shift from... Basically, they were rejecting the fantastical.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were looking for characters on television that were just like people they might know,
That's
or that they
exactly right.
could conceive of
Yeah.
meeting
That was
in real life.
exactly it. The realism was, they realized that the younger generation, which was spending the money, wanted realism in their shows. And that's why the Westerns went the way of the dodo in many ways, and the cop shows were the action replacement for them.
Yes, that's a good point. And again, this notion of set aside this fantastical, this idealized America that we see,
Or the big budget
right?
uh,
and
kind of stuff.
let's go realistic, because there's some weird shit going on in America in 1970 anyway.
Well,
Right.
John Wayne goes from making True Grit in 68 to making McHugh and Brannigan, which were actually not that great of movies, but they were cop movies that he made in the early 70s
Yeah.
because they recognized, you're a bankable star. This is what people want to see.
And John Wayne with a cheesy mustache just does not work for me.
Yeah, no, it was, and he only lives for another, he lives throughout the 79 was his last movie, but he kind of finishes out with Westerns. His only successful movies in the 70s were the Western movies,
Yeah.
but that's because he's John Wayne.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would say I do like McHugh.
It's okay.
It's
It's not
okay,
bad. John
but-
Wayne is still John Wayne.
yeah, but I like anyway. But yeah, this
But the
flop
world,
in American
the world had
life.
changed.
Yeah,
Vietnam has a great deal to do with
Vietnam,
that.
It
yes.
does.
I mean, they're seeing horror on their TV screen every day. And then after the news is over, and you've talked about the Tet Offensive, I'm going to turn on Green Acres
Gomer Pyle.
or Gomer Pyle.
There's the
never
worst
mentions
one.
Vietnam.
Never mentions Vietnam.
And he's a Marine.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
this realism comes in. We talked about in the show prep movies like The French Connection, this gritty cinema,
Manchurian Candidate.
this realism and all
Yeah.
these things. But
I mean, set in a modern setting with modern intrigue is probably the best
Yeah.
way to put it.
Intrigue is a very good word.
Yeah.
It's a very good word because it recognizes that that story still has the primary role and driver here.
Even
now,
the
series serialized television requires characters.
Yes.
But that takes a little time to get there.
The fantastical still has a place, but it is strictly in the horror. So when you see on television, you're still going to see, what's the one that Rod Serling did after Twilight Zone?
Night Gallery.
Night Gallery,
Yes.
that's it.
It
Which
was
is very much a Twilight Zone kind of thing, only more horror.
very much horror oriented, and it was far more modern.
Yes, it was all,
They weren't afraid. See,
It was true horror as opposed to, oh my god, what a turn of events.
fiction, right?
Yeah.
Well, because Twilight Zone was still very much a product of the 50s, which
Yes.
was very different. But Night Gallery was late 60s. He could do a lot more with that, and did. It was a little ahead of his time, actually, because it didn't last that long.
I thought it was into the early 70s. Was it really just
may
late
have,
60s?
I don't remember the exact years, but you're right. It was around that time.
I could also just be remembering the time frame when I saw it.
That's correct,
Yeah.
Because I actually saw it when I was real little, probably earlier than I should have.
yeah, and it was some scary stuff. But see, they would do that, and movies were the same. You have to understand. 74, you get The Exorcist, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
This changes everything. And B movies, you've got, this is post Night of the Living Dead, which has
Yeah.
never been done. Dawn of the Dead comes out, which is the sequel to it, was I think 73. Scared the absolute bejeebus out of me. This is the commercial on TV, mind you. Because I'm 8 years old. And I'm thinking, why are you showing this at a time when I can see it?
yeah.
The Omen movies.
The Omen was another
The
one.
Omen
That's
is
right. They,
terrifying.
that was,
Yeah.
That's what had never been done in the 60s.
Oh my gosh,
Everything changed. And cop shows, to circle us back,
Yes.
is an exemplar, an avatar, as you were, of this change.
Well, I think it's cop shows are kind of a compromise in a way.
It is.
Yes.
That's exactly it.
Because, as you said, Martin, about, we're watching stories about the Tet Offensive, which was actually a U.S. victory, but, portrayed as a massive loss. And we're going to go watch Green Acres or Gomer Pyle.
Yeah.
So people could, once you start seeing that kind of realism, plus you had, 3 major assassinations in the 60s.
That's right.
60s were tumultuous for a lot of reasons, and television didn't catch up to that until the 70s.
Yeah.
And I think that the cop shows are the compromise. Because on the one hand, yes, we're going to show you something that's a little bit more real life. Situations that you could read about in the newspaper if you didn't actually encounter them yourselves, yet still have a hero.
The cops
right.
are going to win.
That's
in
correct.
most
Yes.
of these.
And almost all of them, the
it's
cops win.
action, too, which the Westerns were very good about
Yes.
that. They provided
There's still some
action.
gunplay.
That's right. You still got some of that, but you're doing it in a modern...
But let's talk about a couple of them specifically.
Yes, we've laid, I think, some great groundwork.
Yes, because again, a lot of this is we want to talk about them because they're fun. We chose kind of a tongue-in-cheek title for this Who Loves You Baby, because a lot of these are just fun.
They are.
And-
they were
and-
well written most
yeah.
of the time.
And for us in Middle America, it's a window into where they are set, which is
Yeah.
predominantly New York,
San Francisco,
San
LA.
Francisco,
Yeah, that's right.
So it's
Maybe Chicago.
these towns kind of become a character too,
Which was unique also.
Yes.
That had not happened. We can bemoan the fact today that every show that's out there takes place in either New York or LA. That started in the 70s with these cop shows.
yeah.
That
That's true, because when you think about the
'Cause the
shows in the
Westerns were
60s, you don't know where Bewitched took place.
No, that's correct. We never grounded it in reality, and all
No,
the
Petticoat Junction, it was just somewhere in the south.
see, all the rural stuff.
You assume.
it was
Yeah.
all that. It was
Yeah.
very
But
rural.
Even the westerns are just westerns.
Somewhere out west.
And,
that's right.
and we had, but these shows served as kind of a window
They're on the street.
into these places. So just a couple.
And they
of
dealt
them.
with real issues, too.
Yeah.
Because you would see murders, assaults. You wouldn't really get as detailed, like explicit, like sexual assault and rape.
No.
But you would see real examples of crime.
Yes,
Not necessarily really graphic yet.
crime shows. I think that's a very good way of putting this. And
That
that might be it might be even
Crime,
better.
yeah.
But you're talking about specifically cops,
Yeah.
just to kind of keep us grounded a little bit.
Yeah. Again, a lot of the detective shows are great, and they flow right from those old novels, of detective novels, and the police procedural flows from that as well. But
Yeah, they're brothers.
yeah, Dragnet, and it's specifically the Dragnet 67 to 70. That's the ones with Harry Morgan.
That's the
Pre-Mash.
color ones.
Yeah, the color ones.
Who was before Harry Morgan when it was black and white? I don't remember. I'm blanking on that.
I do not remember the actor or character's name.
See, that's exactly right. Because of when we grew up, we actually remember. You should remember anyway. The actual first run of those Dragnet episodes for a while anyway.
Yeah. The color ones became the more syndicated because you wanted to have color programming.
Exactly.
In the 70s.
That's right. Yeah,
But they're very good with Harry Morgan as Bill Gannon, I think is the character's name.
and Jack Webb, of course.
And Jack Webb, of course, playing Sergeant
Wow, there
Friday.
has been a lot of incarnations of Dragnet.
Yeah, it goes back
has.
to the radio in the 50s.
Yeah.
There's a 1947 movie, it looks like.
Yeah.
Then you've got, looks like 51 to 59 is the first really long-running series.
Right.
And that's Jack Webb and Ben Alexander.
There
Yes.
weren't. I mean, it's one of the few cop shows that is thriving in those 50s and 60s time period.
Yes, it is. Because
There's not many of those going
there
on.
are not. When you think about cop shows, it's really...
Yeah.
The earliest one most people are going to think of is the color Dragnet. Partially because of syndication.
Yeah.
Yeah, partially because there just wasn't a whole lot of cop shows.
it was heavily syndicated, and it was good stuff.
Yeah,
But
it was a good show.
It was, Friday and Gannon came out on top, but not with a lot of violence usually.
right.
No, you catch the guys, and then you have the realism. See, there's that realism again. At the very end of those shows, they'd say, "This is the guy." They'd always show the pictures, the mug shots of the folks, and they said, "This is what happened to
This
them."
is what happened. They got so much of a
So and so went to the
sentence.
gas chambers. I remember watching that when I was probably 7 or 8 years old at my grandmother's house. I'm thinking, "Excuse me, really? That freaked me out.
Yeah.
What do you mean went to the gas chamber?" This is the sort of thing, the realism, because this is at the same time I'm watching Lost in Space in reruns with Dr. Smith going crazy and having a blast of a time, and I'm thinking, what? That's the change.
Yeah.
That's where everything really did change in that 1970 time period, and the cop shows were a really... Sometimes they were funky, sometimes they were sometimes they were... Mod Squad is one we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
It was attempting to marry that late 60s hippie culture with
Well, hippie
the
was
culture.
really early 70s. That's really when it became
It was. I mean,
prevalent.
and it was trying to put that
mob
together.
is a
with-
very early 70s kind of term.
the Mod Squad. I remember that one. We didn't watch it much. I saw it in reruns.
Yeah.
But it was out there. But there was a lot of really good ones. You got a list.
Yeah,
Martin.
and again, our title of our episode comes from Kojak, which is super fun.
Surprisingly,
Kelly Savalas set in New York.
I saw very few of those.
Huh.
Believe it or not, and I don't know why. What was the network? Do you guys remember that it was on?
No, I do not. No.
I don't know. I'm sure, Robert, you can probably pull that up really quick. I watched very few of those. I knew of it, and I knew that it was very popular. But sometimes you just don't get... and there were... Columbo was a huge one.
Yeah,
And
now Columbo...
he was more of a detective.
Well, he was a police lieutenant.
That's correct, and that's how I remember it.
Columbo was a little bit different in that it was a little bit longer format, because it was more of a TV movie that rotated with McLeod
That's correct.
and McMillan and wife.
Right, and the Snoops,
Yes.
and there were a few others that didn't last as long. The Snoop sisters. This is NBC because I remember this.
Yes, this was the NBC
See, Sunday
mystery
night
movie.
mystery movie,
Yep.
and they eventually broke them apart into different things. But there were some that didn't survive. I'll tell you one that was really good. My parents absolutely loved it. It was a western, Heck Ramsey.
Yep.
You remember
Do not
that one?
remember
This
that
is
one.
Richard Boone. It was
Richard
really
Boone is Heck Ramsey.
He was a detective cop in the Old West. And this was a big deal. They actually, because my parents were of the generation that Westerns are cool. Cop shows, meh, that's not really what we're about. But we'll watch Heck Ramsey. but we don't really care much
Well,
about
and that was
McMillan and Wife.
McLeod. The quintessential picture of him was riding the horse down the street in the credits.
That's an attempt to
New
bring
York.
in the
Yes.
old viewers that are disenfranchised, mind you, by the loss of Green Acres and Gomer Pyle and all the rest of them.
And Bonanza.
Probably more so by something like Bonanza than
But
than the
because
others.
Bonanza at this, and I don't remember when Bonanza ended, but I want to say it was right around the time that McLeod was brought in. It's kind of like, we know that you miss Bonanza, but here's something that I think that you'll like. Let's get you into this. McLeod was a very good, and Dennis Weaver did a fantastic job because he was in Gunsmoke previously.
Bonanza went to 73.
73,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And McLeod was probably right after that. And Dennis Weaver was somebody they knew in the Western genre. So let's move you into the cop shows. That's their intention anyway.
Right.
And sometimes, whereas Kojak, he's unapologetically New York, brand new.
Yeah.
They knew
Right.
Telly Savalas. He was a very well-known actor at the time.
Good character actor up until that
Absolutely
point. Yeah.
Greek, believe it or not, and
Yes.
he comes across as a fantastic job. I mean, he's done. He was Pontius Pilate in The Greatest Story Ever Told. He was Ernst Stavro Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Talked about his career.
Yeah,
He was Joe in Kelly's Heroes.
Absolutely. So he's well
Which
known.
surprised me. Great role for him.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
almost like the quintessential Telly Savalas role.
That's right. But in many respects, you're exactly right, because that character of Big Joe is Kojak.
Kojak to a degree.
Yeah,
To
you're
a
right.
degree.
You're right.
If
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
if
But it was
connect the two,
yeah.
it's pretty obvious that he's just doing that. And Telly Savalas is a fine actor. Gone from us too early, I'm afraid. He was just good at it because he was, in many respects, the face of the cop show in the 70s.
Yeah.
He was probably the most famous, certainly not the only one, but he was one of the big ones.
Let me throw you a couple more out.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, some of these are straight police procedural uniform cops, and some of them are the detective style cop.
Yeah.
Hawaii Five-0.
Oh, Jack Lord. Yes, I remember.
I mean, Hawaii Five-0 was super popular.
It was
had
super
that
popular.
exotic setting,
Yes.
snappy lines, and
Bookham Dano. It's still part of
Yes.
our lexicon even today.
yeah.
And if you were to ask a millennial, they might know that, but they darn well probably couldn't tell you where it came from.
Well,
That
yeah,
was
honestly,
terrific stuff.
people much younger than us.
Yeah.
Never mind millennials. I mean, that's, we tend to pick on that age, mainly because that's the
We love millennials.
current young adults.
That's correct. That's right.
But yeah,
We love them, but we
yes,
we
we
also
gave birth
understand-
to them.
That's right. We just
Yeah.
understand there's a difference here. That's okay.
Yeah, that's all we're pointing out. But yeah,
What else you got?
So let me throw another couple out to you. Adam 12, kind
Yes.
of spin-off of
What, Adam?
Dragnet.
Martin Milner and Kent McCord. Was that a syndicated show?
yes,
I seem
yes,
to remember
absolutely,
that. I was
yeah.
syndicated.
No,
That's,
it was first run.
Well, yeah, that's what he
Network,
means.
but
Eventually,
then-
it was syndicated.
But
into,
eventually it would be
yeah.
syndicated.
well, I was
Yeah.
going to say, I thought it was first run syndicated.
No, there was no
Later.
such thing as syndication back then as a first run.
Okay, that's what I'm...
That's really new
in the 80s.
in the 80s.
That's
Yeah.
right.
You know, Star Trek Next Generation
Generation
is one of the
few.
first ones. Yeah.
Well, there were others like Dance Fever and things like that were first run syndicated.
okay, yeah, you know, game shows, stuff
Game
like
shows,
that.
things
But,
like- yeah.
but as far as shows that had scripted shows,
That's right.
that would have been very unusual to have.
That is correct. You just didn't
Yeah.
do that very
So,
much.
right, that's a spin-off from Dragnet. And then a spin-off from it, not a cop show, but one that I loved when I was a kid, Emergency.
Oh, yes,
Yes. Oh, that was must-see TV for us.
yes.
Yes.
Emergency was
and then called Emergency 51.
yeah,
Yes.
loved that
and it
show.
went to syndication.
Yes, most
Randolph Mantooth
Yes,
and
Kevin Tighe.
Yes.
That was that. My sisters absolutely thought Randolph Mantooth was the ultimate guy in the mid '70s.
and you know, a spin-off from that, I think, was one of the Doctor shows. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Ooh, yes, you're right.
Marcus Welby was, I think, set in that same universe, but there was another one. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I think they briefly spun off a doctor show, a hospital show.
Yeah.
I don't think it held up and did
Which
last
is
long.
really unusual because, you know, now that's common.
Well, Doctor
That was
shows,
really unusual back
Doctor
then.
shows have had their they ebb and they flow. I mean, Marcus
Not that there
Welby
was one.
yeah.
Just that they were set in the same universe.
Well, that's correct, and that's probably the same producers. Well, I mean, you might remember I do not remember the name of the show, but it was like Emergency, but it was a spin-off later with Lorne Greene was in it. And this was, because he was a fine actor. This was probably right after Battlestar Galactica, I think.
I don't remember.
Check that one out, because I remember that's more. It's kind of like an emergency show like that. But these are the same type of things. It was just a different spin. It's that realism we've talked about. That
and I don't remember. I wish because I researched a little bit about him, Adam 12 and Emergency, and I think they were trying to set up a spinoff with the doctors that were on Emergency, but never really did.
Well, it's an amazing thing, because a lot of the popular shows today are retreads of Emergency. Lone Star 911. My wife absolutely loves that show.
911 and Lone Star. Now, the only thing I don't like about Lone Star is that it is in your face about being inclusive. I don't care if you have whatever, but they explicitly in the very first episode make that a point. It was virtue signaling in your face. Yeah, I don't care who's on the show as long as they're good.
Right. Rob Lowe really makes that show, and Liv Tyler, you've got some serious star power there.
The only thing I like about Liv Tyler is that she can't speak in anything other than a soft voice. If the woman had to scream, she'd never be able to do it.
There's some truth to that. She's a fine actress. Yes, she is.
Yes. Her story on the show is interesting.
It is. It's but that is an outgrowth of Emergency. That is the same dance, different tune.
Yeah.
It's just in 2020.
To have a universe of these programs that are all connected. Dick Wolf's doing it right now with the Chicago stuff, because he's got Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, and Chicago PD.
Yep, that's
right. Are all connected.
And of course, Dick Wolf is probably the king of these sort of shows, because he did all the Law and Orders forever,
franchise,
as well as more than a few others. I don't think I could possibly. We could almost do a whole show on Dick Wolf's shows, because that's he's done some good stuff.
It's really not uncommon for a successful show to spin off another TV show, even back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I think in the 70s, when we saw, Dragnet, Adam 12, Emergency, this long chain, that was probably unprecedented at the time.
Well, Maude was a spin-off, and the Jeffersons both were spin-offs of All the Family.
Yes, they were. Well, you had Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Joni Loves Chachi.
I had forgotten.
Mork and Mindy.
That's right.
Yes. So, I mean, it certainly happens, but, it's once they spin off, they're usually totally separate.
Yeah.
But now they certainly weren't huge crossovers like we might see in like the superhero TV shows on CW or anything like that. But it was I don't know. It just seems like it was more unique back then.
Yeah.
Maybe because it was the real world. I don't know.
Well, let me throw a couple more.
Hold on.
Yes.
Code Red was the name of the Lorne Greene show in the 1980s after Battlestar Galactica, where he was the chief. I had to look that up.
Oh, you had to look it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I couldn't find it.
It was short-lived.
There
It's short-lived. But I saw a couple of those, and hey, I liked Lorne Greene. Anything he did, I was willing to watch. When he was on Battlestar Galactica, I wanted to watch it just because I knew him. So may he rest in peace. He's a wonderful actor. But go ahead.
Starsky and Hutch.
Surprisingly, as a child, it was on ABC for me. I knew it was a phenomenon. I couldn't watch it, though.
It was the paint job on that car.
Yeah.
Yep.
That and the sliding across the hood.
Sliding across the hood.
I never saw any of them. I knew they were on, but we could not get ABC where I was
that's
at.
right, yeah.
That's right, because I was in a rural area.
I thought it was Channel 3, NBC. You couldn't get in the
My
rural
grandmother had problems with Channel 3, but she got ABC perfectly. In order to watch, for me to watch the James Bond movies, I had to go down to her house and watch them.
Is the difference between being in Louisville and being in New Haven? Because
exactly
here in Louisville, Channel 3 was the one you couldn't get, wasn't it?
No, you could get all of them.
3 is usually a strong signal.
Yeah.
Of course,
because
back in the day, these are terms nobody would know anymore. But
UHF and VHF.
Yeah, 3 and 11 were the VHF stations,
which were WHAS, which were CBS, and
back
NBC.
Back then,
feeds. That's correct. It's changed since then. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Channel 32 was ABC,
which was UHF, which we could not get
yeah.
where I was at. And it was just that ultra high frequency. You just couldn't get it. But my grandmother, who lived in town, which was just a mile or so away, So if there was something like the James Bond movies, which ABC ran in the late 70s and early 80s, I knew they were coming. I couldn't watch them. I had to go down to her house.
So,
Actually, that's actually kind of cool.
of the cop shows we've talked about, because I think it's probably a good mix, is there a prevalence of uniformed cops versus detectives?
Most
in
of
the
the
cops?
time, it's detectives.
That's what I'm thinking
because
of, but...
they're going to be dealing with more dramatic stuff.
Right, because
it's
uniformed cops are
homicide.
usually the beats.
Yes. So Adam 12 is probably
Yeah, that's the cop on the beach.
exception,
Yeah, that's
cop
one of
on
the
the
few.
beat. But Kojak is plainclothes detective,
Right.
usually investigating major crimes.
Mannix was the same, was he not?
Mannix
He
was
was
a
a
detective.
detective.
Show.
That's
That was a
correct.
true detective, PI.
Yeah, PI
Right,
show, like Barnaby
like,
Jones.
like
or
Barnaby Jones
Magnum
or
PI,
Rockford.
Rockford, yes.
was probably the most famous of all of those. I
Yeah.
think it certainly had high
James
ratings.
Garner was a big name to do a TV show back then.
Yeah, absolutely, he was, and that was a phenomenon in the late '70s. Everybody watched Rockford. It was one of those.
I gotta
things.
say, there was one scene that I know this is not a cop show, but it's just epitome of the realism of the time.
Yeah, that's where we're going.
So Rockford is arguing with some con that just got out of prison, and the con is trying to show his how strong he is, and he takes a beer can and he crushes it. Well, we don't think anything about that nowadays, but it was the time when they were converting to the thinner, lighter aluminum.
Right.
So Rockford grabs one, and is like, "They're aluminum now. Anybody can do this," and squeezes it
As
back
opposed
out
to
of
the old tin, which was what
Yes.
it used to be before that.
Yeah. So it was just hilarious.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the
So-
moment in Jaws, where
So very
yeah.
grounded in the time.
very realistic, and that's kind of what we're going with here. Is the fact that
Yeah.
realism all of a sudden became not only expected but enjoyed. We
there's
had
something to be
changed.
said for two different ways of looking at what you watch on TV, what you look at for entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's books or TV or listen to on the radio back when it was radio shows. There's going to be probably two main schools of thought: people you look up to and want and aspire to be to,
Mm-hmm.
and then people you can relate to. In the 70s, it was people you can relate to.
That's exactly right.
Now, there's still an element of people you look up to, but a lot of these heroes, the main characters on these shows, also had flaws.
Oh,
They were
absolutely.
not the ideal that you saw
They were
earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben Cartwright has kind of gone away. Marshall Dillon has gone away. Those marble men who had no flaws and were the white hat hero. That's passé at this time.
Well, they have found a place again, but with a few exceptions, they're still flawed. But now they're superheroes. They are people who are so extraordinary that they're so special. You know?
Yeah. But I think pointedly in these shows, at least all the ones I could remember, there's no corrupt cops.
Oh,
These
That is
shows-
the exception.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
you know,
that's
you think about today, they would do more of that, and then you would.
It's a
have-
given that there are
and-
dirty cops.
Yeah, I mean, in the movies, you know, Serpico establishes that a little bit,
right.
and even things like The Godfather and Godfather Part 2, showing that cops were bought. But these shows here focus primarily on cops
Fighting the good fight.
fighting the good fight, that honest guys, and that's, you know,
They're out to
all way
find the
through
bad
these.
guys. The bad
Yeah.
guys are not within; they are without.
Yeah. So
Well, and I think
that's,
that
that's
also-
something separate from the movies.
Yeah. I think that's also a holdover from a reaction to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Because you want to see the good guy winning.
Yeah.
And we weren't seeing that on our television sets in Vietnam.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you want to see something realistic, but you want to see it go right.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, you cannot have that complete inversion.
Yes.
You want it. You don't want to be insulted, because I think Gomer Pyle insulted people. Now, it wasn't its intention, but by the time when it ended, it was thinking, "I'm sorry, this is not funny anymore." And no matter how good Jim Nabors and Frank Sutton were, and they were, it's over. It's done.
But it's also a limited shtick.
That's correct. It's,
That is
it's
part of the
repetitive.
problem with comedies.
That's right.
It's based on a shtick or some thing that has been turned on its ear. And the problem with most comedies is they do that to death and beyond.
That's right, and that's why you needed All in the Family, which was a amazingly well written comedy.
Yes,
but it was totally different.
It was socially conscious.
That's right.
Yet it was also a comedy, and it dealt with serious issues.
Oh yeah, they went
and it confronted the evils of the day that society was trying to change.
Mm-hmm.
It dealt with racism and sexism. But yet still did it in a funny way. Archie Bunker, flawed though he was still the hero of the show.
Which
is just phenomenal.
That is so
Today,
well put.
Archie Bunker would be a monster if you portrayed him on television the way he was then.
Well, interestingly, you brought up comedies because we talk a lot about pendulums and, there's mirror images to everything. And Francis, I know one of your favorite cop shows isn't a serious cop show.
No.
It's a comedy cop show, but it's a comedy of the mundane.
Right.
And that's Barney Miller.
It's considered to be, and I think this still applies, if you were to ask a policeman, wherever they are, what is the most realistic cop show on television of all time, they would have to say Barney Miller.
Yeah.
Because it celebrates the mundane, and it is one of those character-driven shows, Robert, that you like so well. Believe it or not, this show is done most of the time on one set that doesn't change in front of a live audience.
It is extremely rare to see a different scene other than the squad room or Barney's office.
That's right, which is essentially the same set with just a door between them.
You almost never even saw the hallway.
Right. Some of the first season, they actually had some moments in Barney's home, his apartment, but they quickly got away from that. They discovered that's not where we want to be. You'd have a special occasion every once in a while. They visited Fish's home once upon a time when Dietrich was there, and he imitated He imitated Gregory Peck, of all things. The characters really, they drove the show. It was not a plot-driven show. It was a character-driven show.
It was in a way, Seinfeld before there was Seinfeld.
That's correct.
It was a show about nothing.
That's right.
I think, a comedy about the tedium the weirdness and the regular things cops had to come across, especially in the 70s, because there's a lot of societal strain here. And there's transit strikes, or
and Barney
garbage strikes.
Barney Miller is
falling apart.
The beauty of the writers of that show is they dealt with every single thing as it happened. So when there's a garbage strike going on, you can bet you Barney Miller's going to deal with that before very long. They're very set. The bicentennial is celebrated properly. The energy crisis is mentioned. The elections that go on. All of these things, this show is grounded in the real world going on around it.
I remember there's a scene of Barney Miller talking about, I guess, buying his apartment. It's going co-op.
Yeah.
And he's talking to Harris.
Yeah.
Ron
Glass, yes.
Ron Glass, about interest rates.
And of course, Harris is the financial whiz.
Yeah.
That's right.
And he starts telling him about, you're going to get a rate of 21%. And Barney's like, wait, what's the prime? Oh, prime's for good customers.
That's right.
So, 20% interest rate is insane.
That's right, but that's what
the 70s.
That was the 70s.
Yes.
And if you want to understand the 1970s, watch 8 seasons, mind you, and they probably would have gone longer. They could have, but that was
they're only half-hour episodes.
Yeah, but the guy that did them, he says, I'm done. I think we've done all of them. And
well, that's the thing about most of these police shows, procedural shows, detective, almost every show. After about 5 to 7 seasons, you've done all you can do.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
and
I just wanted to talk about that setup too. Of here's all these serious cop shows, couple of uniform ones, like Chips or Adam 12, and then all
T.J.
Hooker. Then all of these, detective type, homicide, plainclothes, Streets of San Francisco, Hawaii Five-0, Hill Street Blues, and then flip it over, and
you get
Barney Miller. The setup of, nothing really good, nothing really dramatic or serious ever
But
happens.
it's hilarious. Danny Arnold deserves the credit for that show. He was the
Yes.
creator of that show. And it's amazing. And he had some great actors to work with. Hal Linden was, of course, phenomenal as the title character. But you've got Ron Glass, we talked about. Steve Landesberg is amazing
Oh my
as
gosh,
Dietrich. He's
Love
probably
him.
everybody's... You didn't think that you could replace Abe Vigoda as Fish, but they did. And they did it well.
It's
Steve Landesberg was
so
amazing.
deadpan,
It was-
hysterical. Jack Sue.
Jack, may he
Oh,
rest
yeah.
in peace. He passes away in the middle of the 5th season, and they do a retrospective of him at the end of the 5th season, where they break the fourth wall, and they're all the actors saying, we loved Jack, and you find out that Jack Sue dies of a heart attack like immediately, and Hal Linden's there in the hospital with him as he's wheeled in, and he doesn't come out. So it really just shows some fantastic. It was just well written, and
Yeah,
see, that's what
yeah.
I think that was
Great
so great about this show.
yeah.
humor and
We celebrate on this podcast. We like to celebrate well written stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the things we always go to,
and
and
that's the
Barney Miller
interesting
is
thing
one of those moments.
That's the interesting thing about Barney Miller. To me, when I think 70s cop shows, this is probably one of the first ones I think of.
Absolutely, it's the first one in my list.
And one of the things you were talking about is how, Francis, that it is, it's more like every day in a cop precinct.
That's right.
Because when you think about it, when you look at all of the cop shows, all of the detective shows, or the hospital, all of the, if you actually added up all of the murders, and rapes, and suicides,
Well, they're
and assaults,
dramas.
it would dwarf anything in New York, L.A., Detroit, and D.C. combined over 10 years.
Absolutely.
well, and the cops would all hang themselves.
And
out
the
of
cops all hang
depression.
themselves, yeah, because they're constantly having shootouts. Most cops will tell you they've probably fired their weapon, like maybe twice in their entire career. These guys fire it twice every 2 minutes. I mean, it's
Whereas Barney Miller, you can go for the entire 8 years, and the show lasted 8 years,
Yeah.
mind you. In the 1970s, that's unheard of.
the serious moments, the serious crises. They stood out.
That's correct. And
Just like in a real
and there
cop
were
show.
there were occasional times where Barney would say, this is a code whatever, we're leaving, and they all leave. They grab their guns and they leave.
And then they come back,
And
the
then
next
they come
scene,
back
and
in
they
the
talk
scene
about what
and they
happened.
talk
yeah.
about what happened.
Or they
Exactly.
bring the perps in.
Exactly, and they put them in the cell, and then they,
Yeah.
and then hilariousness ensues.
So, it's just looking at the time, I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
The significance of that.
Did you all see it live, or did you see it in reruns?
I saw it live.
See, I saw it all in reruns because it was ABC. I didn't get all that, but our local, and it was before the show was finished. It was still being aired live, but it was like towards the end of its season when the local CBS affiliate started showing them in the afternoons after school for me.
Yeah.
And me and my sisters went absolutely ape, over this show because it was so
Marty says
good.
shit all the time, Franny. You can say it.
Ape shit, absolutely. And you can talk to my sisters today, and it's one of the favorite memories we have in the afternoons after school is watching Barney Miller reruns.
Yeah.
Because we realize, wait a minute, this is good stuff. This is very good.
And, comedies that when we're younger, comedies appeal to us more than the serious stuff.
There's some of that, but it was so well written.
Well, yeah,
it
I mean, that certainly-
it was better
that
than
helps.
most anything else on TV at the time.
But because when you're a kid, you look for the stuff that is fun first.
Yeah.
Now that's going to be either a lot of action or a lot of laughs.
Well, we certainly loved our Lost in Space, that's
Yes.
for sure. And Batman TV, come
yes.
on, that was fantastic stuff.
Yay,
But-
Batgirl.
Oh yes, Yvonne Craig, may she rest in peace. Adam West, may he rest in peace
Yes.
too. He was gone a little too early from us. Those were formative shows for us. And Barney Miller was kind of the next step after that. We kind of changed. When the 60s stuff started going away and the 70s stuff started coming in, we kind of changed with it and realized.
Change with it, yeah.
But that was the whole point of the cop show. It's changing the way we as a society and as a nation looked at our TV and what we wanted to see in that.
Well, and when you think about it, it's a relatively, this far gone, maybe it's not relatively recent, but, from the very beginning of visual media, Law and Order and justice had to prevail.
Oh, yeah.
Censors at the studios would make sure that bad guys didn't win.
You could never, you couldn't show it that way.
And even into the 70s and 80s, less the 80s, but into the 70s especially, you still had that.
Yeah.
You still had a sense of right and wrong, and right always had to prevail.
Yeah, you changed the format, but ultimately, the white hat had to win, and the black hat had to go to jail.
You might get a lecture.
Yes,
Yeah.
you almost definitely were going to
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
lecture.
lecture.
At least on the serious shows.
Yeah, Dragnet had a lot of lectures, and there was a lot of excitement in these shows.
Yeah.
Streets of San Francisco was an exciting show, but you brought up a really good point too. Of a lot of these shows, the end of the episode, except for Columbo, that was usually an exception. Columbo usually didn't have any violence,
Right.
and Columbo was an exception too in that normally the audience knew what had happened.
That's correct.
You were watching Columbo figure it out,
But
Yeah.
you already knew.
That's correct, which is unusual. There's no mystery here. There's just
The
how
only
did,
mystery was how somebody didn't strangle that guy for being just one more question.
Just one more question.
that's right.
But-
How does he figure it out?
Yeah,
It's
but-
not what is it?
Yeah, in a lot of these shows, especially the more action oriented ones, there's the gunfight or something at
Oh yes.
the end of. So you're talking 30 episodes, and Kojak's in 30 gun battles in New York. It's like, holy crap!
New York's a dangerous place.
Yeah, and he's going to get arrested. That part of it didn't really happen.
Right.
That was unsustainable.
Yeah, and
that's
that was what
that's
was
why
really
most
neat
of these shows didn't last the 8 years that Barney Miller did.
Yeah.
Because that was sustainable,
Well,
but the others
it's
were less
far
so.
more palatable to watch something like Barney Miller
Mm-hmm.
than it is to watch a shootout every week for 8 years.
That's right. You just
Oh
couldn't
no,
do
I
it.
say that, but although it's not really active shootouts, the crime-related shows
Mm-hmm.
that have lasted for a long time today are still not about the shootouts.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's a little more rare. The ones with the good story arcs usually don't have the shoot.
Law and Order, the Dick Wolf shows.
Well, not just Law and
That's-
Order,
that's-
but even
that's
the
just an
CSI,
That's a good one.
NCIS, Criminal Minds, Criminal Intent, or what was that?
That was a Law and Order.
That was a Law
There's
and
Law
Order,
and Order,
Criminal
yeah.
Intent. There were several of those. Special
you know,
Victims Unit.
but almost
and
all of
others.
these are the quest for justice, first of
Yeah.
all, but there's very rarely action, which is very interesting. A lot of these shows now are cerebral. They were not cerebral back then.
right.
And I don't know.
They were mysteries in many respects
In
because
some-
it
yeah.
was we have to solve the puzzle. Sometimes
There's a lot to that. Even some of the medical and legal shows were about that.
They're still there.
House is a great example of solving the puzzle.
It was a medical puzzle, but
Yes.
ultimately.
Emmy.
Quincy,
Quincy
Emmy,
Emmy,
oh,
I love
yeah.
that show. Jack Klugman was fantastic in that show. That was one of my
Yeah.
favorite shows in the late 70s because it was a medical puzzle, but it was also a crime puzzle too.
Amateur detective, again, going all the way back to like the Miss Marple.
That was the
stuff.
first,
You know.
CSI kind of show.
Yeah.
It was.
Because I remember seeing episodes where he would, show, all right, here's where they put the pillow over the guy's head and shot the bullet, and you see, where they actually talk about blood spatter and stuff.
And what was it? Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah.
Diagnosis Murder.
long running Matlock.
Matlock.
Those are all long-running
The amateur
shows.
detective show.
That's right.
That's a whole other setup of those. But these were so much fun when we were kids.
They changed the world in many respects.
Some realism, some parts of them not realistic.
How did they change? I don't know if they changed the world. I think
Well, they reflected the changes.
I was
in
going
the
to say,
world.
I think they're
That's what I
indicative
mean.
of.
They were
indicative
more
of the change
reflection.
that was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were a totally new genre of TV that
Yeah.
came about because the world had changed.
Yes, I think this is one case where definitely the
Art
shows
art reflects
reflected life as
Yeah.
opposed to the other way around.
Right.
Because a lot of times media does lead life,
Yeah.
but
Well,
not always.
you-
This is a case where
Yeah, you
life
can't
led the
underestimate the fact of the deliberate change in 1970 of we're not going to do these old.
media.
shows
I imagine
anymore.
that wasn't just done on a whim. They must have had some
no.
kind of
And-
inkling that needed to be
Well,
done.
yeah, you can look that up on Wikipedia. The article is actually very, very robust in the decisions that were made, and it was NBC that made them, if I'm remembering it right, that says, we're not going to do this anymore. And a lot of those shows, they literally canceled. I mean, Green Acres was like 5 years in, and they gave it one more season, but it was like way up there in the ratings. You know, if you think about it, this is kind of like suicide, you would think, and there was a lot of criticism that went on. It was the right decision.
Yeah.
Because All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore were beyond what these old shows had.
Yeah.
Well,
the ratings were amazingly heavy.
It certainly enabled what would eventually become the Family Hour, which is that 7 to 9 period, depending on time zone. Because Maude, especially some of the top, any of these, they might have aired early, but often, really, they dealt with some serious adult
a lot of those
issues.
shows were not on until 9:30.
Right.
And this is true of the cop shows too.
Yeah.
This is stuff that we just hadn't dealt
Kojak
with
I think
before.
was 10.
Yeah,
maybe
10
wrong,
o'clock
but-
was the real serious stuff.
That's right. Well, I know Hill Street Blues was in the 80s.
Yes, Hill Street Blues was
By
at
that-
10 o'clock.
I think at some point it had moved to 9. I think it had moved earlier.
Maybe. I do remember when we were at Bellarmine that Hill Street Blues was on, and Remington Steele, of all things, with Pierce Brosnan, was a 10 o'clock show. They would be a little bit, even though that wasn't in any way risque, but there was a little bit more sophistication that went on with those later shows.
Yep. Yeah, Hill Street Blues. I mean, Hill Street Blues, the pilot is 2 officers being shot.
It was
very striking.
if we want to talk about groundbreaking, it's the next generation.
Yeah.
Kojak is one thing, but Hill Street Blues takes it much further than that. And then you've got NYPD Blue after that, which locally, do you guys remember this? It was not allowed to be shown because the first few episodes for the first season actually had nudity.
Oh.
Yeah, and Sherry...
I never really watched that show.
Dennis Franz did one, which I don't know that's the image that we want.
Yeah, that's like seeing Ron Jeremy. Nobody wants to see that.
But Sherry Stringfield, who was eventually in ER, she did several nude scenes in those early episodes of that.
I vaguely remember the controversy over it.
Yeah, because they ran a Canadian syndicated show in its place, Dempsey and Makepeace, believe it or not, because
that sounds familiar.
Because they refused to show that here, and we weren't the only market that did that. That says no, we're not going to allow you to show, even though it was just a naked behind. That's all they're showing. It's not gratuitous. It was not, particularly
depending on the
flaunting.
behind, it could be gratuitous.
Sherry Stringfield naked looks very good. I'm sorry, in 1989. That's just kind of the way it's before she did ER. There were a few others that did that.
I'm not sure who that is. Who is she?
She was in ER.
That doesn't.
I'm
help.
sorry, I can't give you. You'll have to Google
Who was
her. She was one of the doctors in there. She was the
Yeah.
girlfriend of the main character, which was Caruso. He was later in CSI Miami. David Caruso.
David Caruso.
She was his girlfriend in those early episodes. Who himself became quite well known because of that show, NYPD Blue. Eventually, the local networks here decided, "Oh, this is popular. I guess we better show it."
Eventually, they did start showing.
They did.
it. Yeah,
Eventually, they
I remember
did start
that.
showing it, and before long, it is on the cable networks, and then everything changes because the late '80s, early '90s, you still had the network dominance of many things. This was one of those things that changed all that.
Yeah.
And that's when it was one of the envelopes that got pushed, because now they won't go quite that far, but sexual innuendos and people in bed together, it's common now.
Yeah.
It would absolutely never be shown before
It's
that.
so common that
You have
on
to have it.
Riverdale, which is a show about teenagers,
That's right.
while the implied sex is not shown,
That's right.
the before and after and the heavy making out prior to the actual implied sex is prevalent. I mean, you're talking about what is essentially statutory rape.
That's correct.
Even when it's 2 minors, I think it's still considered statutory rape. I don't know. But I mean, it's still illegal either way. And yet this is no big deal.
It is expected in just about every show now that you
Yeah.
will see 2 individuals of both sexes, mind you, same sex and non-sex, and hetero and homo. They must have those scenes.
Yeah.
It's to be
Which,
expected.
you know,
That's a long road we've opened.
Yeah, and, back in the 70s, and any of these cop shows or detective shows or any of the others, we still didn't do that.
Oh, absolutely, would never be shown. It was NYPD Blue that changed
even for
that.
all the realism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There was still some stuff that nobody wanted to
that's right.
see.
And it just shows how society has changed
Yeah.
in those, because you're thinking about it, that's 40 years from Kojak, 1970 with All in the Family and Kojak, till now. And
It's 50 years.
50 years. Well, yeah, it's
So, guys, that was good stuff because, again, those shows are so much fun when we were kids. I wanted to talk about them, reminisce about them,
well, they still
talk
are.
about what they
Well,
meant.
If you can catch them, they're
I
out
find
there.
that a lot of the shows that I have fond memories of, very few of them when I watch them again, I watch them and think, this really isn't as good as I remember.
You're exactly right. Nostalgia plays a huge part.
Yeah. Now, Barney Miller, I
Miller's
still
one.
think is funny.
It's
I don't
hilarious.
care.
Oh, yeah, Barney Miller.
Barney Miller, I can still
really
watch
well.
and think, man, this is as good as it was the day of.
Yeah.
But it's probably the exception.
Yeah.
There's very few
Part
others.
of it's, the story's so goofy or so simple. But, sometimes it's just, oh my God, some of this is just so cringe-inducing. But as a kid, I loved it.
And they took some of these things that were serious and turned them into camp when they did
Yes.
them as films. Chips turned into a big goof camp.
It
But
did.
was
Chips is kind of a
serious
goof
thing.
by
It
the
was
time the end
intended to
came
be that
along,
way,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was when we were kids, and this is in our late grade school, early high school time. It was phenomenon. Everybody
Oh, yeah.
watched
Eric
Chips.
Estrada was the bomb.
Eric Estrada was the bomb, and he couldn't get a job after that.
Well, no,
Unfortunately,
he could, but he had to go
had to be
into
the
Mexico and Latin America. It was the only place he could get serious work.
That's right. Yeah, because he is a capable actor.
I mean, even Bloom County in the '80s made a joke about it. Eric Estrada needs the work.
That's right.
I forget what the joke was. The rest of it, but that was the tagline, or the
right.
punchline.
Yeah. So that was good stuff, guys.
That was fun.
Yeah. So, Francis, what are we doing next time?
We're back to history again, folks. And this is when we did our Rome series a few episodes back. We did a few months ago. We did a 4-episode series. We're going to start one of those again. I had a good time with the Rome one. We're going to finally address the Civil War.
Which, honestly, for the Civil War buffs, that was one of the first things
I know
that
why
we
it took us
started
so
doing
long.
together was Civil War stuff.
We're
This is going to be some good arguments.
Yeah, we've almost got 50 episodes in the can here, and while we have done some, we have done William Tecumseh Sherman, we have done Ulysses S. Grant. Those are personalities; those are heroes. The actual history itself, we have not tackled, and we think, we need to do that. So, what we're going to do over the next 4 history episodes, the next 4 months, we're going to dive back into 1863, sort of. Mostly. And we're going to talk about the 4 major battles that took place during that time. We're going to actually do Fredericksburg, which is technically late 62.
It's a span of 8 months. It might as well just be 63.
Might as well be. It just happens to be in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 4 pivotal battles
Of the Civil War.
set up.
In the East.
Yeah, that finally set up.
Vicksburg is the West.
That's right.
Yeah, that finally set up the decision.
That's right. It really is. It's everything that happens here. If you want to talk about the major ones, these 4, we're going to do one next month. We're going to do Fredericksburg, which Robert, you're going to captain that one. And then we're going to slide into Lee's masterpiece of Chancellorsville after that. I get to do Gettysburg. We're planning on that one to drop in July itself to talk about that one. And
when else?
When else? Exactly. Mm-hmm. And Martin, you're going to end us with Vicksburg, which of course is coterminous actually with the same one. So we're going to basically through the summer now.
Yeah.
We're going to discover again the Civil War, and we're going to go military history more than anything else, but how important this was for that very formative moment. We talk about that a lot.
Civil War, maybe it's just because it's the thing that probably the 3 of us equally have studied the most.
That's right.
You guys have, I've looked at some stuff more than you have. You guys have certainly looked at World War I more than I have. So, but this is the one where we were probably, if not equally, as close to being equally versed on.
Yeah, and why it took us so long to get here, I'm still not quite sure.
The thing that is, I think, that makes Civil War so interesting is not just the American versus American. To me, it is just the uncanny amount of moments in all of these different battles where things could have gone differently for just but a single split-second decision.
Oh yeah, the alternative what ifs, and we love what ifs.
We
around
do.
Here. It's
We have not done a what if, I think, since the Kennedy one.
That's right.
Yeah.
But in many respects, some of these, I guarantee you, will venture into that territory.
Well, yes,
That's
one of
what we do.
the
Gettysburg is intended
Yes.
to be that way.
Because what if Stonewall had been there was the premise.
That's the premise of that Gettysburg episode.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fun 4 episodes coming
For us,
up.
it is. Probably a warning. The history episodes for the next 4 months will probably go a little bit longer than normal. I imagine.
We
Well,
can't
it has
avoid
to-
that. It's just there's
has to
so
But
much
it's fun stuff.
there. Yeah, it's so much stuff there. I look for Fredericksburg is the next one. We're going to kick that off. Like I say, Robert, you're going to work with that one. Join us here. You're going to have a great time. We promise you.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.